British political operatives, not Russian, not Iranian, British operatives who are closely tied to Kamala Harris and the UK's Labour Party are allegedly meddling in our elections by plotting to take down Elon Musk's Twitter. Why? Well, because Twitter has become the last major platform where real debate, real dissent, and real freedom of speech can happen. And this isn't just about one social media platform. It's about foreign actors trying to control what Americans can say and see, potentially swinging the next election. Our guest tonight, Paul Thacker, broke this story wide open, uncovering the plot, the players, the plans, and he's here to explain how this impacts every single one of us. Paul Thacker, independent journalist, former U.S. Senate investigator, founder of Disinformation Chronicle. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here, Paul. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'll make one correction on the intro. They're not
Sure.
allegedly interfering in our elections. They are interfering in our elections.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's not the Russians. It's not the Iranians. They keep telling us it's them that are interfering with our elections, but it's actually the damn Brits still messing with us.
It is.
Yeah,
I think they're paying us back because one of my colleagues, when I was in the Senate, actually became a political operative, and he was the guy behind Brexit. So maybe it's payback.
Okay. So tell us about this. So you have been uncovering this with Matt Taibbi recently, the Center for Countering Digital Hate. And we first heard about the Center for Countering Digital Hate. When was this? This was because you wrote about this. You've been covering this organization for a while, and you wrote about this. What was it? A year or two ago during COVID. They came out. They're the ones that came out with the disinformation dozen, the dirty disinformation dozen, or what was it called?
Correct.
Yeah, so tell us about
disinformation guide.
Yeah.
And who they were is it was a group that so when that report came out, the Disinformation Dozen, I saw it happening on Twitter, and I was like, okay, whatever. Like, I didn't know what was really going on, but at some point in time, I stopped to take a harder look at this entire censorship industry, what I call big disinformation, and what had happened. Written an investigation for the BMJ looking into problems with Pfizer's clinical trial, and the thing was based upon documents. It was based upon internal secret recordings that were made by a whistleblower, and so there was nothing to discuss about the story. It was a solid story. There was no cracks in it, and we got one of these fact checkers that came out and fact checked us on it. And so we couldn't share it on Facebook. And my editor called me up to talk to me about it, and what I told her at the time was, there's nothing wrong with this story. If there was anything wrong with this story, you would know it because you would have already gotten the letter from Pfizer's general counsel. And the lawyers couldn't find any problem with the story. So this fact checker is not going to find any problem with the story. And they didn't find any problems with the story. They just said lacks context. And I had no clue what that meant at the time, but it disallowed people's ability to share it on Twitter. So I started thinking, what is all this disinformation stuff that's out there? I keep seeing it, your disinformation, and we're not censoring things, we're moderating them, right? And so I started looking at the Center for Countering Digital Hate because they had made such a big impact, and they come out of nowhere, and they were being quoted from the podium of the White House. Biden even mentioned them, talking about Facebook. They're killing people. And so I dug into their background and found their 990s, found their money, and wrote a story about this for Tablet last year. The group is run by, they pretend to be a disinterested nonprofit. They were created back in 2017 by a guy named Morgan McSweeney. He's now the chief of staff to Prime Minister Keir Starmer. They worked behind the scenes. They were very hidden. And one of the first things they did was they killed off The Canary, which is a leftist website in the UK. Of course, none of us have heard about it over here, in the States. But they killed them off by basically accusing them repetitively of anti-Semitism, for which there was no merit for any of that at all. But it basically hurt their advertisers. And so they had created a strategy in which they would make accusations of misinformation or anti-Semitism or hate or whatever you want to call it, to basically drive advertisers away from this media outlet. And it caused them to have to lay off the majority of their staff. I interviewed the former editor-in-chief of this. She was almost in tears when I was talking to her. She was talking about how, she was a woman of color, she had autism, And she was like, well, who do you think the Nazis came after first? It was people like me, and then now I'm being accused of being a Nazi. And she's like, it was so crazy. I mean, the woman almost started crying when I started interviewing her, at the time for Tablet. The other thing that it explained to me was something that I think a lot of conservatives get wrong. A lot of conservatives think that this misinformation, disinformation stuff is about censoring them. That's not what it's about. It's censoring everyone. It's censoring people on the left, people on the right, anyone who steps outside the narrow boundaries of the center left, right? The sort of corporate arm of the Democrats or the corporate arm, sort of conservative arm of the Labor Party. So that to me was very eye-opening in trying to understand like who they were. The other thing you have to understand about them, they're a dark money group. You can't tell where their money's coming from. No one understood where the money was coming from when they operated in London. When I look through their 990s, when they first popped up in the United States, so now they have an arm in the United States. Imran Ahmed actually lives in the United States now. He lives in the District of Columbia. I looked through their 990s. In their first year, they had raised almost $1.5 million as a brand spanking new profit out of the gate. And I thought that was like very hard to understand. And then I tracked down through a donor assisted fund, I think is what they're called. It allows wealthy people to give money to an entity that then gives the money out where they want it to go, so it doesn't track back to the original person. You just see it coming from this. In this case, it's a Charles Schwab fund. So there was $1.1 million that went to the Center for Countering Digital Hate, because on the 990s you can see who the donors are, right?
Mhm.
Or no, I'm sorry, you can't see who the donors are, but you can tell how much money they brought in. But on the donor assisted fund, I could see that they had given $1.1 million to the Center for Countering Digital Hate. So then I look to see, okay, you got $1.1 million from this donor assisted fund. You got 1.5 million that year. That's almost 75% of your money came from one single donor. Well, what I know now from an insider is that came from a woman named Aline Kashishian, who is an agent in Hollywood. She's the agent for Mark Ruffalo. One of her partners, I just found out today, is the agent for Selena Gomez, who I know now just gave them a secret $100,000. So a lot of their bolus of money came initially, when they landed in the United States at least, out of Hollywood. Mark Ruffalo is on Twitter promoting the Center for Countering Digital Hate. Now, here's the funny thing about Mark Ruffalo. The first thing that Center for Countering Digital Hate did was they took out Jeremy Corbyn. They pushed him out of leadership so that Keir Starmer could take control of the Labor Party. Guess who Mark Ruffalo was gaga about for being Prime Minister of the UK? Jeremy Corbyn. He's now working directly with the guy, Imran Ahmed, who helped to push Jeremy Corbyn out of office. Now, part of that is because Imran Ahmed's a very clever operator. And, I mean, I'm sure Mark Ruffalo doesn't spend a lot of time trying to understand the internal politics of what's happening in London any more than he does trying to understand what's happening in DC. But it just
Mhm.
shows you that, like, these dark money groups, even the people supporting them don't really know what they're doing.
Right. I think that's I think that needs to be understood more, that a lot of people just buy in, especially people with money, celebrities in particular. They're just buying into whatever they're being sold. So someone says, "Look, we got a problem online with all these extremists and all this misinformation and disinformation. Don't you
Yeah.
agree?" And these people say, "Oh, yeah, I agree. Oh, and you're a good guy. You're going to go do something about it." But they don't realize that this supposed good guy that's going to go do something about it has his own agenda, has their own, they've got their own vision for how they see things and how to get from point A to point B. And it might not always align with the person giving them money. Sometimes it does. Like sometimes, a lot of times, people with money will control the situation. And other times they're just useful idiots in a way, just giving them the money, and then they run off and do these types of things, which is kind of interesting. So tell
I,
us,
I've seen that. I've seen that
go
so
ahead.
often,
Yeah.
by the way. I've seen that so often, by the way, with nonprofits in DC, in which there are just some people who their skill set is tickling money out of rich people,
Hmm.
and that's a skill set all its own. And I think that's really much the case. Ahmed is knowing how to manipulate wealthy people in Hollywood. One of the initial donors I found out was Sacha Baron Cohen, early on, who gave him some money initially, but I don't think he's giving money anymore. I think he figured out who this guy is.
Hmm.
But the whole game is basically to, when they landed in DC, from what I could tell, the game initially was to attack. There's no real left in America, right? I mean, we've got the Squad, we've got Senator Sanders, who's now, like, come back into the fold. So there's not a real left in America. Maybe the Santa Monica City Council or something like that. But at the federal level, we don't have a real left, in America. So there was no real threat from that. So the initial game plan, for what I could tell, based upon who they were messaging on and who they were going after, was to attack the two threats to the Democratic Party, and those two threats were Elon Musk, because he bought Twitter, and RFK Jr., and that's who they hammered on repetitively over and over and over again in their first year.
Yeah, yeah, they really did. Tell us, before we get on to how you uncovered that they were trying to kill Elon Musk's Twitter, and what that
Right.
means exactly. How did they have so much power that when you wrote something and they flagged it, it wasn't shared? How did they even get that kind of power to be able to sway platforms like this?
I think it's partly, first off, the guy who's running Imran Ahmed's a very clever, very smart guy. Like, this guy's a pure political operative, out of London. The problem, I've emailed some of his people over, and I've told them is, London ain't DC. I know DC, and baby, when you come to DC, you gotta level up. So their game is a London game. It's not quite ready, I don't think, for DC, which is why I was able to pick them off so easily. But
Hmm.
they interact directly with the advertisers. They interact, like, they were going directly to Twitter. We have some stuff out of the Twitter files where they were sharing their stuff internally, and then Twitter was taking action. They have good relationships with people at Meta. So they have relationships with all the social media outlets, also with politicians back in London. So Imran, the online safety bill in England, the guy who, excuse me, the guy who sponsored that bill, Damian Collins, he's on the board. He's an MP who's on the board of the Center for Countering Digital Hate. The first person who spoke in favor of the bill was Imran Ahmed in Parliament.
Okay. So now tell us, how did you uncover that they were trying to kill Elon Musk's Twitter? And what exactly was the
So,
plan to get that done?
so I'd written a couple pieces, and there's a lot of deep unhappiness inside the organization. And several people have read the pieces that I wrote, and I got contacts out of the blue and started talking to people, and they're telling me what's happening. And I said, hey, I just want to let you know it's great, to talk to me and tell me these things. I can't really do much with that. I can do much more if I have documents. And then suddenly I started getting documents appearing, like, in my email. I've gotten documents just recently. There's people inside there today who are still leaking stuff because they realize, first off, that Imran Ahmed is not someone they necessarily want to work with. But also, I think there's some deep concerns about, what this organization is doing. If you look at that monthly planner, that we released, where it talks about how their annual priority is to kill Musk's Twitter. At other
Hmm.
times, in different weeks, they talk about whether they need to incorporate a C4 or not. And so they're actually, under the IRS, they're incorporated as a C3, which that status allows you to be educational in nature. And so you can do things because you're mostly doing education. Once you begin directly lobbying, like spending a majority of your time lobbying, my understanding from living in DC is once you go above 20% of your time, then you need to register as a lobbyist. And so once you begin directly lobbying, then you need to incorporate a separate entity under the IRS tax code, which is the C4. But there's different transparency issues at that point. I don't think you can hide your donors. And so they're in a really tough position because I think they know that they're running afoul of current IRS regulations, but they haven't formed this C4 yet. So they're really
Hmm.
playing. They're really, like, right on the edge with everything they do. The hidden money, they're pretending to be educational while they're actually lobbying, and also just the basic fact that they're a political campaign. They're not educational in any way. They're no more
Right.
educational than Media Matters for America. They're no more educational than Stephen Miller on the right with American First Legal. This guy's nakedly a political partisan for Trump. There's nothing wrong with that, The problem is when the media doesn't explain that to readers and treats them as if they're an objective nonprofit who can be trusted. And that's what's happened over and
Right.
over again for several years now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's really, well, at least with Democrats, right? Democrats are trusting a lot of these sources and then using it. And as we saw Biden citing them at the podium and saying, well, this organization said this. And so therefore, we need to start censoring these people and these people are dangerous, right? The people that they list. And they're not coming forward and telling us, oh, but this is just another arm of our campaign, essentially. This is just another arm
Right.
of our political leanings. And so, our political side said this.
So the first thing I knew that there was something political going on because the chair of the board on the 990s is a guy named Simon Clark. He's an American, and he was formerly at the Center for American Progress, which you might remember, basically helped to run Hillary Clinton's campaign. They're they're not, I don't call them like a left of center think tank. I call them a Democratic Party think tank. They're
Hmm.
much the same as like Heritage Foundation is basically a Republican Party, think tank. They're not a conservative. They're basically like a think tank for the Republican Party. Whereas something like Cato, I think, is much more ideological. They're much more libertarian. They're less connected directly with a political party. I try to make some of these distinctions at time. So my guess is that Simon Clark has been, ushering them around DC because they're all over the place in DC for a nonprofit that has, I mean, like something like Public Citizen, for instance, has been around for like 30, 40 years, and they don't get this kind of swing, because, they're more of a traditional do gooder, left of center nonprofit. They're not a naked political campaign the way Center for
Hmm.
Countering Digital Hate is.
So, how are they planning to kill Musk's Twitter? How do you get rid of Twitter?
So if you look at the document, what it says is the first bullet point sort of is kill Musk Twitter. Right below that, it says advertising focus. And so what this tells me is that they're recapitulating the same strategy they use in England, right? Which is to make accusations of hate, make accusations of anti-Semitism, make accusations of misinformation, right? To then scare away advertisers. And that's been their plan and their strategies, from the beginning. I wrote a piece last sort of, I think earlier this year for the New York Post, when Elon Musk took out a lawsuit against them. I saw very clearly what was going on because you could see the attacks coming from the Center for Countering Digital Hate, right? And Media Matters for America. Now, Media Matters for America is treated in the same way as if they're an objective nonprofit. But we know who they are because the New York Times
Hmm.
reported who they are. They were created by David Brock. I mean, there was a big New York Times piece back in 2016 called Hillary Clinton's Outrage Machine about all the sort of nonprofits that David Brock had created. And yet to this day, the media treats them, as if they're an objective nonprofit. The New York Times is right now, as we're speaking, working on a story that's going to hit a bunch of conservatives based upon Media Matters information. This is in the emails from the New York Times. I mean, again, there's nothing wrong with that, but like, why is the New York Times working only with these Democratic Party sort of affiliated nonprofits? Like, why don't they work on both sides? And I think we kind of know it's because we kind of know what's going on in the media right now.
Right,
You know,
right. Do you think this is why Elon changed his tune quite a bit when it came to Israel? I'm just curious because this was like such a strange thing to have happened where, we heard about the attack on with advertisers going after Twitter. And there was this
right,
whole push to get rid of the advertisers. Elon was scrambling, his CEO was scrambling, and they were accusing him of anti-Semitism. It seemed to be like the thing that they were using as the way that they were going to rip all these advertisers off of Twitter. And he just bought this thing for billions of dollars, right? So he's freaking out. And then
right,
suddenly we see this
right.
pilgrimage to Israel. Suddenly we see this like complete and total shift when it comes to Israel. And a lot of us suspected that it was very much, I mean, they seem to be correlated, right? It seemed to be that they were threatening him with the advertising. They were calling him an anti-Semite. And suddenly he does a pilgrimage to Israel and he's all in on, all in for Israel. Do you think there was any connection
I,
there?
I, I think there were bigger people involved in that than Center for Counter Digital Hate. I think there were much bigger and shaker, much bigger movers than that. I can tell you that the campaign that CCDH ran sort of on behalf of Labor Together, which is a political campaign, and they were created by Labor Together. One of the biggest funders for Labor Together is a guy named Trevor Chin, who I had no clue who the guy is. He's a British Jewish financier. He was one of the main funders for Labor Together. And so if it involved someone like that, if it involved, like, I don't know, direct conversations with Netanyahu, I have no clue what caused Elon Musk to do that 180. But, hey, you saw it and I saw it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I guess the big question now is what now? Like now we know about this organization. We know that they are creating all of this. So, they're supposedly helping us clean up the internet from misinformation, and really they're
Right,
just pushing a political agenda. So what is, we, the average person, what do you think the game plan is for us seeing this and knowing that they're trying to take away our free speech? They're trying to meddle with these elections. They're trying to label people conspiracy theorists and misinformation peddlers who are maybe not, maybe some are, maybe some aren't, right? But we should be able to make
right,
that decision or at least see rather than a political operative telling us. I mean, if it were up to the political
right,
operatives, we would think, Donald Trump is literally Hitler, apparently. And so we have to be
right.
worried about that. There's a lot of things that are being said. So what do we do? What do you think we should do?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing that, something to think about is, after our piece came out, there were two counter like sort of reactions. Like, is it really, like, are they really what Paul Thacker and Matt Taibbi reported? One was in the Washington Post, right? One of their technology reporters, of course, and the other one was in the Guardian, which is basically like, an arm of, Labor Together, of the conservative arm of Labor, which Keir Starmer runs. And this is because Imran Ahmed has ties with these people. Like, I expected this stuff already. This guy has been a media political operative for like years right now, has contacts throughout all the media. I don't know what to tell people to do except my one advice is always for people is to read wisely, read widely. Try to
Hmm.
get your information from as many different sources as possible. Don't think that everything you read in the Washington Post is garbage or the New York Times is garbage. Don't think everything that's like alternative media is like, good. There's good and bad everywhere. And I think in this really kind of deteriorated, media environment, you have to get information from many different sources as possible because there's good stuff everywhere. There are amazing reporters that don't work at mainstream media outlets, and there are terrible reporters that work in the New York Times, that work at the Washington
Hmm.
Post. And so just try to get your information in as many places as possible. And my hope is that this entire disinformation industry is shut down. I think it needs to be shut
Yeah.
down, all of it. I think the
Yeah.
grants going to academia. I think these academics need to stop it with this nonsense. The stuff coming out of the State Department and Homeland Security needs to end. I think all of these companies need to end. I mean, if they want to take these tools and use them for national security purposes to deal with foreign, enemies and stuff, that's fine. What they're doing though is they're turning this inward and they're turning it on us, and that's unacceptable.
Right. I agree. It's got to go. It's just got to go. And instead, what we have to do is just educate people to do their own fact checking. Like, where was this disinformation, industry when back when we were kids and our uncles were telling us stories? I mean, or the neighbor
When,
telling you a weird story.
Exactly. When I started off in journalism in 2000, I moved to New York and worked at two different magazines. My first job, a typical first job in journalism, is a fact checker. Like, that's your job. You get to write short pieces and you're a fact checker. I did fact checking. I know how it's done. I know what the process is. We're now basically, we don't check facts. Fact checkers don't check facts, they check narratives. They don't care if your
Hmm.
facts are right or not. The whole issue is like, are you within like what is accepted by the left of center sort of politics, within
Right.
inside the federal government, within the Democratic Party? Once you stray too far from that, you go too far to the left, you go too far to the right, you're fact check wrong. It
Right.
doesn't matter
Right.
whether you have the facts or not. It doesn't matter what documents you have, you're fact check wrong.
Yeah, I agree. This whole industry needs to die. I mean, luckily we were able to cause enough noise to get rid of Nina Jankowicz. right? And
Right.
the czar of disinformation that they were putting into an actual official government position, which is just extremely scary that they were actually going to create that position. But so I think we need to make more noise and get rid of this entire the fact checking. I mean, I like the idea of the community notes, I suppose, on Twitter where anybody can.
Yes.
But then again, I'm like, who are these people exactly? I'm not
Right.
able to write a community note, so who gets to write these notes? That's I mean, Wikipedia in some I know people don't like Wikipedia at all, and I know Wikipedia has its problems
No.
for sure. But I don't know what it's like anymore, but it used to be where anybody could go in there and edit something
Right.
and change
Right.
something. I don't know if they allow that anymore, or if they also have their own select people that they've decided are the ones who are going to
No, 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 no.
say, and fact
Wi-
check.
Wikipedia is a complete cesspool right now. One of the former founders, I believe his name is Larry Sanger, pointed out you can't trust it anymore. If you go to my Wikipedia page, right, it will
Yeah,
tell you that I'm an anti-vaxxer. Why does it tell you that
right,
I'm an anti-vaxxer? Because I wrote an investigation of Pfizer's clinical trial pointing out that there were problems, right? When
right.
I was assigned that story, I told my wife, who was finishing up, she'd left the hospital where she works at to finish up her PhD. And I told her, like, honey, I'm going to a pit for like 2 weeks. Like, I could see I've got like all these documents I got to go through. I've got secret recordings. I got to make sure that this person isn't lying to us. It's going to, like, I'm going to be working around the clock for 2 weeks about this vaccine. And she's like, which one is it? And I said, it's the Pfizer vax. And she's like, well, that's the one we got. And I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot. I forgot that was the one that we had gotten. Like, that's what we had in Spain because that's what Spain got. So I disclosed at the bottom of my investigation, I was required to by the BMJ to disclose that I was double vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine. I
Hmm.
still got called anti-vax.
Right. That's how it works.
it's
That's how it
it's on my
works.
Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know?
it's crazy. But the concept of it was good in the beginning. I think the concept of Wikipedia and the concept of community notes, they both have a very similar concept. But of course, even this shows that even those concepts can be corrupted. So it's
Oh yeah.
that just or so maybe there just shouldn't be any of I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I like the community notes, especially when I see a video and it'll show something really outrageous and then the community notes say, "Oh, that's not actually from that event. That's actually from a." Like I saw
Right.
one, it was like a Kamala Harris rally. Look at all of these people at this Kamala Harris event, and then the community note said, "That's a country music concert." That wasn't
Right.
Kamala Harris event at all. So I
Uh,
appreciate it, but I also have to be worried because I don't know who these community noters are, who these, the people editing Wikipedia.
just last month when I was on vacation, I got I got one of these like fact checks on something I'd uploaded on Facebook. There was a video going around from Kamala Harris talking about it was something along the lines about like, well, we're going to regulate that. It had something to do something along those lines. I can't remember exactly what it was, but so I took that video and I put it on Facebook and I said, because in my head I'm like, how do you not know about the First Amendment? Like, you went to college, you went to law school, you then became a
Right.
prosecutor, you then became attorney general, you're then vice president. Like, how do you not know the Constitution? So it irritated me so much. And I said, I said something like the Democratic nominee who wants to be president does not understand the Constitution, something like that. I got a note on Facebook that I had misshared a video because other people had said other things about the video. Now, the fact check came actually when I clicked on it, it was a fact check in Italy. So I had to like go through and like translate it from Italian into English so I could understand what it actually said. And the thing was crazy because it was like, I didn't say anything about what these other people said about the video. Like, I didn't say that came out 4 years ago. I didn't say any of these things. I just said, I don't
Right.
like what she shared, but
Right.
I got checked on that for
Right.
misinformation, by
Yeah.
Italians.
Right.
Why are Italians messing with the American like election? Like, what is going on?
Yeah. Good point. Really good point. I mean, it just really boils down to we all have to do our own fact checking. We all have to do our own research and our own, that needs to be taught to people and instilled in our culture of don't just trust anything and everything. Do your own research and fact check. But of course, one of the problems with that, right? The government doesn't want us to do our own research. Certainly, like during the
Right.
COVID pandemic, we saw that. Just trust them. trust the science,
Right.
right? Trust them, what they have to
Well,
say. Don't do your own research.
you can see it also like when, that sort of crazy thing that went happen in Springfield, Ohio, where like we were being told that Haitians were maybe eating pets or something like that.
Mhm.
And I didn't know what was going on, but like this whole thing sounds crazy, right? I mean, but like I still at the same time I saw these videos of people going for this, city council and they're upset, and so I'm like, something weird's going on in this city, I
Mhm.
didn't know. But like what did the reporters do? Like, when you see the reports, they called up the police chief and said, "Hey, did anything bad happen in your city?" Nope. Fact check wrong. It's like we're in this
Right.
point right now where basically what journalists do is when there's a controversy, they actually go to the people in charge and ask them if there's any problem with them. It would be like, like, is there any problem with GlaxoSmithKline's like latest drug coming out? Well, we talked to the CEO and he said no. Fact check wrong. Like this
Right.
independent evaluation, they obviously don't know what they're doing. That's what we've turned like journalism into right now.
Mhm. Yeah, just ask the authorities, and the authorities said
Yes,
everything's okay.
right.
It's
It's
completely
crazy. It's
against
the
what
opposite
journalism
of
is supposed to
journalism.
be. Right, yeah,
Yeah,
journalism is supposed to
exactly.
actually look at authority and find out if they're lying to us and hold them accountable, but instead we're just, "Oh, they said, and so therefore
Right.
it is what it
What
is."
what's crazy is that it's 2024 and actually need to explain that to people because my guess is that there's some people in their 20s who don't even know that anymore. They don't even understand that concept anymore.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of that. Just trust the authorities. That's all you need to do. It reminds me very much of Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, who said, you should just get your information from the government. Only trust the government. Don't listen to all of
Right?
these people online.
I know.
Crazy.
Well, here's something I know. Here's what I know is going to happen is it'll be interesting to watch. If Trump wins the presidency, watch how suddenly you're going to see a total pivot with all the censorship industrial complex, big disinformation is suddenly going to be questioning the government all the time. They never did before, but I'm
Right.
interesting to see like how we get a pivot all of a sudden. There's one interesting fact which I don't know you're aware of, but there was a report in the Harvard Misinformation Review, which is like their sort of bible of like all these disinformation I call them the censorship clergy. Like they're like the new priests, and their job is to tell us what we can and cannot do. Before it's like who we can and cannot have sex with, and when we can and cannot have sex. Now it's like what you can and cannot say, and what you can and cannot think. Right.
Hmm.
And at the bottom of this, it was a survey of the academics in this area, and there was an appendix at the bottom. What was interesting about that is it talked about the political leanings of the people in this industry. There were no conservatives, none. There were a handful of center right, and then some more center left, but like 85% of them were either center left to far left, and zero conservatives. And I'm sorry, like I'm no one's idea of a conservative, but like everyone has a right to have an opinion. And the way it
Right.
works in journalism is you interview everyone to get their opinion because everyone has their own experiences that explains why they think the way they do. It's just like being a being a journalist or just being a basic like decent human being. I mean, I
Hmm.
think that's how it works.
Paul Thacker, thank you so much for joining us and being here and giving us all of this information. People can find you at Disinformation Chronicle. That's your Substack. We do have the link down below. We also have the link down below to the actual piece that you guys wrote, that you and Matt Taibbi put out there. Let's see, it's this one right here. Racket News, election exclusive. British advisors to Kamala Harris hope to kill Musk's Twitter. So people can read that. That link is down below. Paul, once again, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Hey, Kim, thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for watching. This was just a clip from the longer, larger show that you can catch Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. That'll route you to the platform where you need to be in order to get the full uncensored show every Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Click on that link, watch the full interview. See you there.